We often read the book of Esther as an isolated story, a story of the courage of one young woman whose faithfulness to God saves her people, a story where the villain gets what he deserves and the good guys win in the end. But it's not meant to be read as an isolated story. And the gospel writers, or at least one of the gospel writers, certainly didn't see it that way. They didn't see that it was meant to be read as an isolated story. The gospel writer of John saw the story and the book of Esther as foundational to the story of the Messiah. In this, the first official episode of Foundation and Framework, we'll be taking a look at how John's gospel retells the story of Esther in the trial and the suffering of the Messiah, how God's interactions with Israel in the past creates the template for God's interaction with Israel and for the world in the Messiah. I had originally hoped to have this episode released much sooner, but I had some other things come up that delayed me, as well as some issues with the recording. In the future, I plan to have all of our episodes have a full video, but unfortunately for today, you'll have to just enjoy the audio recording. In today's episode, I'm joined by Patrice Fisher, the co-director of Menorah Ministries and a good friend of mine. I'm really excited to share with you all today's episode, and I pray that it deepens your faith and wonder in the goodness of God. So without further ado, let's get into the Esther Redux.
My name is Patrice Fisher, and I've been married for a long, long time. I have two wonderful children, and they're married to wonderful people, and we have, my husband and I, we have 4 beautiful grandchildren. The oldest is 16, and the youngest one is 8 months old. So that keeps us fairly busy, but our main work is with Menorah Ministries, and that comprises an outreach to the Jewish people here in the Tampa Bay area. We've been here in the Tampa Bay area since 1982. I have way too much education. It is generally not good for a woman to have as much education as I do, because when you try to get an actual job when you get out of school, they say, well, you'll never stay here, no matter what kind of job it is. You won't stay here. But I love to go to school. I feel comfortable in school. And I also love to teach. And I've been teaching since, I'd say, 1984. I've been teaching adults. One year, I taught 7th and 8th graders speech and drama, because that was my undergraduate major. And I suffered. I was not gifted to do that with middle school kids. And so that's when I decided I love teaching adults. Adults and me, I don't want to discipline anyone. I don't have to discipline adults. So I'm with that program. It's great.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully. The areas that I taught in are biblical areas, mainly the Older Testament. The academic areas I've taught in are linguistics, sociolinguistics, semiotics, which is investigation of meaning and signs. And so it's been great because I've sort of been able to balance the two sides of my education, because linguistics is so vital to understand how to read anything, much less the Bible.
Right.
And many people don't know some of the just average beginning things about studying languages and how languages mean things. And so that has been exciting. And I haven't really done a lot with it. I probably should have done more, but we'll see. Life is still going on, and who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, hopefully a few more years at least to work on it.
Yeah, I much rather speak on it than write.
Yeah,
because my typing skills really not good, and it makes me frustrated.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, today no writing, just speaking today.
Good.
So
excellent.
That should work there. So we are talking about the book of Esther, and as of this recording, right, Purim is this coming Monday, but it's not here yet. Now, Purim is the holiday that celebrates and commemorates the events of the book of Esther. So why don't you tell us, maybe for some of our audience who aren't familiar with, or familiar with maybe some of the actual things that go on in the Book of Esther. Maybe they've, like me, they grew up watching Veggie Tales, and so they thought it was like a singing contest or something um, that takes place. Why don't you give us a little bit of some of the background information and details about the story of Esther, so we kind
Mhm.
of have a proper foundation to build on as we explore this.
To tell the truth, although I had a pretty good a Sunday school education, better than a lot of people, I think, um, I never read the Book of Esther until I was married.
Hmm.
And as Messianic Jews, back that was even when Messianic Jews was becoming a thing, we would meet once a month, and we met in one time when we first started going, and they discussed the Book of Esther. Um, the Book of Esther is unique, and the holiday of Purim is unique. I know many Gentile Christians don't know very much of anything, like I didn't, about Purim and why it's widely celebrated in synagogues. It's not commemorated in churches at all. Churches tend to know about Yom Kippur. They tend to know about Rosh Hashanah. They tend to know about Passover. They could do better on Passover, but they tend to not know anything about Esther.
Hmm.
But Esther is that story of her, and they lived in what you might consider tough times. But the end of the story is a miracle where God saves the Jewish people that live in Persia at that time, or what you might call part of the Babylonian captivity. So it's a wonderful story. It has a lot of suspense, has everything, has good times, sad times, angry times. You're scared sometimes. Our synagogue will be putting on our Purim party on Saturday, so we're just doing it ahead of time, 1 or 2 days. But it is normal for at a synagogue that, well, the commandment is that we must tell the story of Purim every year. That's the commandment that's come down to us, I think, rightly so.
Hmm.
Um, and because God did such a great miracle in a foreign country, and among people that you might not think He would be working with, but it really is an encouraging story. Usually, there is a play put on. You can read a story of Purim to everybody, but that's somewhat boring. So many congregations have a play of some
Right.
kind, and it's very extremely loco. It's loony. It's funny and silly, and but as long as it tells the story, we're good, kind of thing. We make it many times. The children put on the play. One time, our congregation actually had a puppet show to do Esther. I thought that was so cool. That was a wonderful way to do it. Um, the rabbis encourage us when we celebrate Purim, and please don't be shocked. I'm just going to say what the rabbi said. You're, it's a time of happiness and revelry. It's a time when people can dress up in silly clothes. As a matter of fact, the rabbis say that
Yeah.
it's just fine if men want to dress up as women and women want to dress up as men. It's Purim. You get
Right.
to do it. And they also say you should be a little tipsy, because when you are hearing the story, here's what happens in a normal synagogue. When Haman talks, everybody goes, boo, the whole audience,
Right.
boo. And when Mordecai or Esther talk, everyone goes, yay. So the rabbis say, you should be a little tipsy so that you get confused between saying hooray for Mordecai and boo for Haman. You get them mixed up. And that's okay, according to I won't call them ancient, like Middle Ages rabbis.
Gotcha.
Um, as a matter of fact, uh, I know many people think that Halloween is when you dress up as silly people, but in the Jewish mind, Purim is the time when you dress up as silly people. So
Gotcha.
it's just a cultural difference,
Sure.
and there's a much more of an emphasis on the story because of the yearly play, and I think it's enjoyable. It's enjoyable to put on a
Gotcha.
party for Purim.
So the
So
Purim festival is the party is supposed to be just a big, loud party. It's supposed to
goofy.
be a lot of fun, silly, um, which is interesting that it's, the idea is to have like a silly party when it's commemorating such a harrowing event and a harrowing story, right? Because as we read the book of
Yes,
Esther, if things had gone differently, there would be no Jewish people. Um,
correct. Well, at least in Persia,
right,
but that would be the vast majority at that
right.
point in history. So yeah.
Yeah. So
Um,
booing Haman because he's the villain, trying to eliminate all the Jews, cheering for Mordecai, because he's the protagonist there alongside Esther. Um,
mhm.
and I think that's interesting. So, a question on the Book of Esther because it gets debated pretty hotly then, at least among conservative versus liberal views of the biblical text. Is Esther a historical book, or is it a creative fairy tale based on an extensive knowledge of historical works and historical realities? Because it's clear that like the author knows the inner workings of the Persian courts.
Mhm. Um, yes, one of the big complaint if we have complaints about Bible stories, one of the complaints about Esther is that the name of God is not mentioned in the whole book.
Right.
So I think people don't approve of that.
Mm.
They feel weird because God's name is not mentioned. But if you do any kind of just read it out of the scriptures, you see God is acting behind the scenes in all of
Right.
these activities that are going on. And as much as we are silly in the telling of the story, I think that is a way to make it palatable for people to want to hear it. Because if you go on the doom and gloom and
Mm-hmm.
anger and uh, treachery and all those themes, people are not thrilled with that.
Right.
But that doesn't mean because God, Yod Hey Vav Hey is not named in the story, does not mean he's not there. He's there. And what I wanted to mention, particularly that many people would not know, but the original uh, the original Book of Esther was written on scrolls, kosher scrolls, and you have to open it up. You open up the scroll like this, and
Right.
then there are columns.
Mm-hmm.
It's written in columns, and you open it more, and you can go on the story. But the way that it's copied into the scrolls, and this is the copying is the same as has been easily since Yeshua's time. We've had the
Mm-hmm.
same columns that are copied from scroll to scroll. At the beginning of each column, it says the king, the
Mm-hmm.
king, the king. And it's not all about the king. He's really somewhat of a tangential
Right.
person in this. He's like the swizzle stick that stirs the drink. In other words, he's important, but you don't learn a lot about the king. What you're
Right.
concentrating on is this relationship between this woman he married, who's Jewish, the king, and Mordecai, and the bad guy who is Haman. So I don't think we should hold against the story if we don't read, the tetragrammaton in that story.
Mm-hmm.
He's there, and boy, at the end, he God makes such a miracle out of what was a catastrophe to come. The clock is ticking down. That in a year from this date, we are going to get rid of all the Jews, and I think the idea is they're going to be killed or chased off. Um, and yet God rescues them at the last possible minute. And not only does he rescue them, he also the bad guys get what they deserve, which my husband in particular, if we watch a movie or any kind of story on TV and the bad guy does not get punished, he gets a little miffed. He wants to see things be made right. And I think a lot of us are like that.
Sure.
A lot of us to see, well, if this is a story that God wants us to know, well, I want to see the bad guy get punished. Let's see what happens. And boy, does he get punished. And that's not a happy part of the story, but we laugh. We laugh about the story because it ends up happy.
So you would say that Esther's like an actual historical account?
I think Esther existed. Do we have any record of her existed? No. Do we have any record of the names of many of we call him Ahasuerus, you might call him Xerxes, but Ahasuerus obviously has a harem. He has many wives. He has many concubines. We don't know the names like two or three, and Esther is not one of them. And so it's hard to place her into a historical timeline, but we know it's during Xerxes' reign. And there's no reason to think it's not a true story. In other words, it doesn't normally contradict anything that we know to be true about Xerxes and his reign there. But
so essentially what you're saying is the only evidence against it is that we don't have direct named evidence for it.
Correct.
There's no
or identify,
yeah.
We haven't found Xerxes' palace, that kind of thing.
Gotcha.
Or we haven't found their tombs as far as we know.
Sure.
But the problem is also, and this is true even in our day and age, it depends on what name you're giving them. And some of these Xerxes, well, in Hebrew we called him Ahasuerus. That doesn't sound alike, but it's the same guy. Right. And the same thing with Vashti. Did she have a different name? Because we might be able to trace her if she had a different name. Esther, she might have had a different name. Maybe we could trace her, but that kind of, it's slippery in there. And I don't think that should discourage us from understanding that this actually happened. The rabbis down through the ages have insisted this happened. This happened.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's an important thing for people to know. It's just like even how far names that we're familiar with today, linguistically, how different they are. Because I know like people, I read my English Bible. I'm like, John, that's an English name. That's not a Hebrew name. Like, but if Yochanan, there you've got a Hebrew name there, and it's like, yeah, I can trace the linguistic connections there, but they don't sound the same.
It doesn't sound the same, and when it's couched in 21st century Western civilization terms, it sounds a little weird and more like a fairy tale. But it has profound ideas in it, really.
Yeah,
when we consider it.
And so, even if it weren't historical, though it seems pretty clear that it's always been considered historical.
Correct.
The main point here is that God is always behind the scenes, even when we don't see him, always working, actively moving history towards his intended goal and purpose.
And not he's working with the king of a great nation. God is working in that king's life. And I'm not saying that he became a believer, but God has action going on in that kingdom. It's not just at my little house or our little family. It's on a worldwide scale.
Right, a global scale.
Correct.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So I wanted to move back to your comment about the divine name not being in there. So like obviously they just nowhere explicitly mentioned, and you talked about how every line starts with the king, the king, the king. Which like I feel like if I were to read that even in English, if every single line started with the king, I would be thinking like, okay, I'm supposed to be thinking
here's the
about
column that always begin this column.
Right.
This column. It's really sort of amazing. It's sort of like an artistic choice that someone made.
Yeah.
Back when they were writing the scrolls. Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard it said that in addition to that the divine name is even hidden throughout the text in different places. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Well, because because the name of God is not obvious in the text, scholars throughout the years have tried to find it in there.
Mm-hmm.
There's various ways you can try to find it. Some of them have to do with numerology, some of them have to do with the themes. But yeah, there's always been that inkling that there is some way to see it more clearly. I have never been a real big fan of spending time doing that because
Okay.
just the story is enough for me. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there are more sophisticated ways to find out
Sure.
that
Okay.
God is in there.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm only familiar with, I think, the four common ones, which are, and I don't remember all the references off the top of my head, but if you look at like the first letter of each word spelled forward, the last letter of each word spelled forward, and then the last letter of each word spelled backward, and the first or the last letter of or the first letter of each word spelled backward. Yeah, there's like four different places in the text where I know that
Okay.
different Jewish sources over the years have said, "Oh, look, here's the divine name."
Okay. And then the rest of us mortals will concentrate on reading this story. Yeah.
All right, all right, fair enough. Um, but the point is that God is while hidden in the text, he's very clearly there.
In the way the activity all turns out,
Yeah,
yeah, I would say
yeah,
it was under his auspices, yes.
yeah. Okay. Um, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the contents of an article that you've written a few years ago now, where you talk about and discuss the use of the book of Esther in the Gospels, particularly in the Gospel of John. And you use an interesting phrase in the article where you talk about scripture coding. Can you elaborate on that a little bit for us, what that means?
Yes. It's not an original concept. It has been hinted at, like in scholarly texts from the 1950s, the 1960s. More in the 80s and 90s, we have one scholar who sort of made it more popular, the scripture coding. And basically, what scripture coding is where a story in the Newer Testament uses a story in the Older Testament. And but if you just read the story in the Old Testament and then you read the story in the Newer Testament, you're going, I can't see any link between these two.
Mm-hmm.
But if you start in a very simple way to look at the vocabulary, to look at the scene, to look at what the people say to each other, um, you can sort of tear back the layer, well, peel back the layer of the onion and see that this is the outer part of the onion, but the inner onion is still there in the Older
Right.
Testament and in the Newer Testament story. It's more than just quoting. Many times people concentrate on direct quotes in the New Testament from the Tanakh. And
Mm-hmm.
that's fine to do that, but it leaves you it's not all that many times the
Mm-hmm.
direct quote, or it's a verse, you know.
Right.
Whereas there are stories, we see it even within the Older Testament as it is. John and I always like to say that um, it used to be, let's say, I'm just going to grab the 1950s. So in the 1950s, the way that people would read and understand the scriptures was God starts at here, and then it proceeds, activity proceeds in a straight line, just a straight line. It never goes back. It always goes forward, forward,
Mm-hmm.
forward. It's always new and unique going forward. It's almost like an engineer is saying, well, we can't go back in time. Whereas when you're studying the literature of it, like you're looking at it as a story and how the story is arranged,
Mm-hmm.
many times it have you heard that history repeats itself?
Right.
Well, we wouldn't say that history repeats itself, but it goes in a circle. It
Mm-hmm.
goes in a spiral going forward. So it's not a direct
Right.
line like a rocket ship. It's a you go. I'm trying to get my finger. It goes like this. You make your way forward, but things they don't repeat themselves. But as somebody else like to say, they
Right.
rhyme.
So instead of time being linear in a straight
It's
line, and instead of it being circular, where it's just a circle that has no beginning and has no end, it's more like a
exactly where you get
spring,
reborn, and
where it's
it,
linear in the sense that it has a starting point and an ending point, but it's circular in the sense that we have repeating patterns. There's repetition that is moving us towards a particular end.
sort of like DNA.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
like that connection. I'll
amazing.
take that
Yes,
connection.
these coils, they you do move forward. Maybe not as quickly as you know
As we'd like to.
NASA, sending a rocket ship in the air, but
Yeah.
you do make forward progression. But also, there are various things that repeat themselves. I'm just going to give one example.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like starting in the Older Testament, you have an evil person who comes into power
Mm-hmm.
and must be defeated by God. And
Right.
then the next time you see an evil person, they're a little bit trickier. They're a little bit more devious.
Mm-hmm.
They do worse things. And then you circle into the next evil person and they're more evil, more determined. It's that.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see the progression of a story, especially in the book of Judges,
Right. Yeah.
where it's that big cycle. It's just a big circle of events that hopefully doesn't really go forward until you get to Samuel.
Right.
So, yes, I think they are dependent on each other at various stories. And you can almost predict what the next thing will be or what the next big thing will be.
Gotcha.
You can so I would look at it that way, and because of that, I had looked into those kinds of things in linguistics. That's the kind
Mm-hmm.
of thing that is perfectly fine to do. And so I was given an assignment in a class, and I had read a couple years before. I think even before I was in doctoral work, I had read a work that made an allusion to the idea that Esther uses this one word that is used just in Esther, and then when it's translated into Greek,
Mm-hmm.
that word is only used once, and it's about the garment that Yeshua was wearing when he was arrested, and how the soldiers took it and ripped it apart
Right.
and threw dice for it, and that's all that was said. And I said, "Well, that's amazing." As a matter of fact, that the gambling thing, the dice thing, that Esther had the garment, and that's the gambling, and that's what poor
Right.
were.
Right.
The
It's the
poor
casting of
were
lots.
things that you gamble with. And then I started thinking more, and John and I would chat in the car as we're driving places. And I thought, this might be really helpful. Not only would I get something out of it biblically, but I could
Mm-hmm.
end it in linguistics. And so it was really helping me. It was helping me out a great deal. And so that's how I got interested in doing it. Um, Usually, I understand that most lay people cannot read Hebrew, so they can't read Esther from the original Hebrew.
Right.
And
Or
they
Greek.
also can't read Greek, so they can't read Esther in the Septuagint. But the Septuagint is the first translation of the Jewish scriptures
Mm-hmm.
into a different language from Hebrew, and it's Greek. And that took place several centuries before Yeshua. So,
Right.
so the Greek translation, the Septuagint, predates Yeshua. So in the Septuagint, we have a translation from men. I'm going to say it's probably men, a group of men in Alexandria, Egypt, of all places to have a Hebrew translation. But it was accomplished there. And they were so much closer to the biblical text than we could ever hope to
Right.
be. And they were the ones they knew Greek also, and they were translated into Greek. And because I took Greek in college, I was able to appreciate the Septuagint. I'm not a genius in Greek, but I can look up words and I can understand basic
Mm-hmm.
words and basic grammar. So I decided that I'm going to look up Esther in Greek and see what else I can see. Um, and I was basically looking for this garment
Mhm.
and where it appeared in Esther. I started the simple way, and then what happened with the poor, and was it like gambling, like we saw in that scene? And it turns out is I don't know if you got the copy of my paper, but it has charts. It has charts where I actually literally had a Septuagint and a Hebrew text, and I have put the words that are the translation from Hebrew to Greek, and I put them next to each other for Esther, and I did that for the Gospel of John in that section where um, after uh, after he's at the Garden of Gethsemane,
Yeah.
and um, and comparing those two stories and their vocabulary, just their vocabulary, and I found like I don't know 55, 65 different words that were repeated in those scenes,
Wow.
and then you go from there. That's how I basically
Gotcha.
did it, and and then
Okay.
when you think about it, so there's that scene. I think Gentile believers. I think when they're reading the scenes where we know Yeshua is going to be captured, he has the high
Mhm.
priestly prayer when they're walking away from the
Right.
Passover Seder. They're walking toward what's the Garden of Gethsemane,
Mhm.
and on the way he's praying the high priestly prayer,
Right.
and we don't think of the actual physical. We're just reading the words. We're not seeing in our minds the physical, what they're seeing there. We don't
Right.
see the scenario, how it works. But after this, I'll just give one example of how it's a little bit spooky. And I was actually doing this mainly here at home.
Mhm.
My dining room table was all cluttered with all these big fat books, and John would be at the office, and he'd come home, and I just go, wait till you hear what I figured out today. Well, here's the part that sort of gave me a little, um, Yeshua is arrested,
Yeah.
and he's taken to a couple different places.
Right.
But the place he ends up is next to the temple. It's where it's the big room, which is the throne room. Um, And so he's going to meet in that room outside the temple. He walks through the courtyard with two of his disciples, if
Mhm.
you can remember that scene.
Yeah.
And there's Peter, and although he's a little bit humble, he doesn't want to go into it. It's John.
Right.
And and so it's clear that he needs to go into and plead his case. Yeshua needs to go in.
Right.
I think he's seeing Pilate
Okay.
uh, whoever he's seeing in the closed room. They walk through the temple courtyard, and there is a charcoal fire because it's a spring day.
Mhm.
So there's basically fires for the soldiers who are
Mhm.
standing guard, and they would have that you could go over and stand by the fire for 5 minutes, get your hands warmed up.
Right.
So it talks about them walking through, and Peter um, says, I'm not going in with you. But John says, I'm going in with you.
Mhm.
And if you recall, John is related to some of these high officials. And I think
Right.
there was a reason he said they're both scared to death. I mean, humanly speaking, they're scared.
Right. This
They
is a
have to go
terrifying
plead the case.
experience. Yeah.
They could both die. It's like Esther. If she goes in that room,
Mm.
she could die. Well, now we have these two guys, and they could both die when they go in the room. But Peter stays out by the charcoal burner, and people say, "Aren't your accent sounds like you're from Galilee? Are you
Right.
friends with this Yeshua guy?" And he goes, "No." And it's that point where he denies that he knows Yeshua three
Right.
times. But meanwhile, that scene where John and Yeshua go into the forbidden room,
Mhm.
which can mean their death, well, that's what that's what Esther experienced. And in her story, a maid is there with her.
Mm.
It's not her by herself. The maid is there. Now, the Greek version has a prayer Yeshua prays before he walks through the door into the room. And when you read that prayer, the prayer of Yeshua, and you put it back in Esther's mind, you're going, this is exactly the same way she was feeling at that moment. And when I figured that, I went, oh my goodness, this is it. It
Right.
just proceeded to get spookier and spookier the more
Are you
that I looked up
referencing
words and stuff.
the prayer in the garden, not my will but thy be done, or you referencing the longer, like the high priestly prayer as it gets
There's
called?
well, the high priestly prayer was before this, before he gets
Right.
arrested. But this is a prayer that's only in the apocryphal version. In
Oh,
other words,
okay.
only in the
I
Greek
missed.
version.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And although it's not inspired in the same way that the Hebrew and Greek texts are,
Right.
it does. It was done at the same time as the Septuagint by these rabbis who were much
Gotcha.
closer to the situation and were probably reflecting something
Yeah.
that they'd been told.
Right. I'm
There's
tracking that.
another couple prayers that are added to the Hebrew text,
Right.
and they don't have to be, God spoken truth, but and this prayer is the same topic as the ones that Esther
Right. It's
was
similar to
praying.
like how I think it's Jude and Peter quote the book of Enoch, where it's like
Correct.
it's not inspired scripture, it's not the word of God, but it still is
Helpful.
conveying an accurate truth that they're using that's part of their cultural milieu to take the mind of the
Correct.
reader to something that they're trying to convey.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, it's much like that chapter early in the book of John where they bring the woman caught in
Mm,
adultery. That's not in the best scripts either.
right.
That's an addition. It's probably true, but
Right.
it's not. Uh, you shouldn't depend on it for a major part of your
Right.
doctrine
Right.
because we can't attest to it. But
Yeah.
it's very helpful,
Hmm.
and that's what I would say. Some of these apocryphal parts from the Greek text of the Hebrew, they're helpful. They
Right.
they give you more information about things.
Okay. Cool. So the scripture coding that John is doing here, and we looked at some of those things. You would say that John is basically taking the narrative, the story of Esther, and he's giving a almost cosmic retelling of it to see how there's a pattern that's established here that we see ultimately is being lived out again by Yeshua, but in a different way.
Correct. He Yeshua it seems to be consciously remembering what she went through,
Mm.
because he was put in the same position.
Right.
Um, that's why I'm saying the physical setting, oftentimes to me, reminds me of other physical settings, other situations that were very much like that I may not have considered before because
Yeah.
who would normally put together Esther in the Gospel of
Right.
John?
Right. That's not my
Uh,
first thought whenever I've read the Gospel of John. Um,
True. It's nobody's first thought.
right.
Well, there's some scholars that they think it's a you know it's a Greek idea. Those are all Greek ideas.
Mm.
Then those are all uh, my brain is not working today because I never think about this. The apocryphal. Eh, eh, John is very apocryphal, and so
Hmm.
it's not historically very good. It's just his
Right.
little fever dream of
Right.
everything, and
Yeah.
yeah, no, he
Right.
remembered pretty good.
I've definitely heard the idea that John speaks from a more Gnostic sort of framework.
Yes,
Um, but then having looked into the historical background of like the Essenes and even like John 1:1 with the Logos referencing the Targumim and
correct.
the just even the philosophical difference between Menorah from the Targums and Logos in Greek philosophy. Um,
correct.
right, there's a big difference there, and the way that John writes is not not very Greek.
No, not at all. And that's true about anything. And we could tell you that in linguistics. Just because something is in Greek does not mean it has a Greek mindset.
Right. It's talking in
I
Greek,
could,
but it's not
I
thinking
could
in
read,
Greek.
no, or influenced by Greek culture at all. It just could just be like your phone can translate things for you. It
Right.
doesn't know about the cultural aspects. And therefore, that kind of translation is going to not give you hints about figures of speech. It's not
Mm-hmm.
going to give you hints about um, idioms. It's just going to take the words and just give you the word, and it may add up to something accurate, or it may add up to something,
Yeah.
really hinky that
Gotcha.
doesn't say what it intends to mean.
Right. So I'm curious a little bit more on um why maybe you can elaborate more just on the why does John go about this route in um making these connections. Is I know we've talked a little bit about like the sort of spiral of history, um but is there anything more or deep, or maybe even just some of the specific connections about like Esther to Yeshua, about talking about what are some more specific examples of how he's reliving this?
Well, you have the settings. You have
Mm-hmm.
the settings he's in. Um, yeah, I go through them sort of in great detail, but a lot of the book of Esther, especially in the first chapter or so, there's the king's party. It's in a garden. It's outside. It's in a garden in the evening. And Yeshua is facing the same situation. It's outside
Mm-hmm.
in the courtyard of the temple. Um, what other kinds of scenarios do you see? Uh, you see evil men plotting in the background. You can't hear what they're saying, but you know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what's happening with Esther and Haman. Evil men are plotting along with Haman in the background because of her secret. And um, Haman just wants to get rid of Jews. So you have that also, I think, affecting Yeshua during that time
Right.
period. Because remember what's going to happen. What's going to happen to Yeshua, we've seen the end of the story. What's going to happen to Yeshua is there's going to be I wanted to say a trumped up mob, but it is. There's a
Yeah.
mob outside of Pilate's uh, court. It's like the courtroom along with his house.
Right.
It's not his house because he doesn't. Pilate does not live in Jerusalem. He's just there to visit on specific holidays. Pilate
Mm.
lives in Caesarea. Many people don't know that. He does not consider Jerusalem. Jerusalem is where the crazy Jews live, and he has to keep the pot.
Right.
It needs to have heat on, but it's tending to boil over, and he just wants it to be, everyone simmer down, everyone, we're going to work this through,
Yeah.
and you are going to do it my way, and I'm going to sort of fool you into doing it my way. He says he's not exactly when he's having that discussion with Yeshua, he's not showing all his cards.
Mm.
He's not obvious in what he's doing. He doesn't really care if he kills Barabbas or he kills Yeshua. He doesn't care. So he
Right.
makes these people, and there's not that many people at that decision. Um, when we think about Pilate and Yeshua having that discussion, and then it says Pilate turned to the crowd and said this and this, but we know from archaeology, we know where Pilate's place was, where he gives his pronouncements.
Mm-hmm.
We know how many people can fit in that area, and it's no more than about 50 to 75 people. It's not
Right.
5,000 people. It's not 10,000 people like oftentimes you see
Yeah.
in Mel Gibson's movie. He's got like 30,000 people are there. And no, it was early in the morning.
Right.
There's just really a small group of people there. Everyone else is
It's
either getting ready for Passover or sleeping in.
right. It's a small
And
group of
so
people that
people, and some of them have been paid to
right,
be there
paid
and
or
to
forced because they're the servants or slaves of like the high priest.
correct, or just anybody off the street that they
Right.
could get. Um, so in that sense that if we consider Pilate is the king in the
Mm-hmm.
story, even though he's not the king from Rome, but he's the
Right.
king and can do whatever he wants in that situation. Um, so the next day they choose the wrong person to crucify
Mm.
from our point of view, correct?
Right.
Um, but we know that Yeshua is going to die, and he's going to die alone with,
Mm-hmm.
like, John is there, and John has his mom Miriam there, but the rest of them, where are they?
Mm.
They're not there at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Peter, remember, just a few chapters earlier, has already said, denied that he knew
Right.
Yeshua. So it takes the Esther story, which, by the way, ends up just fine, and she's not killed and is just fine. But Yeshua's going to go a couple steps farther. He's
Mm-hmm.
going to he enters the room. The king does not put him to death then, but the king says, "We're going to have this little courtyard meeting with some Jews, and he's going to take whatever they say as far as who's going to die in this situation."
Right.
But then at the end, when we have all this amazing vocabulary in Esther about how God saved the Jewish people
Mm-hmm.
and how the Jewish people were able to put out of power all the plotters against them, all of Haman's family and anybody he had on his side. We don't have that in the gospel story, but we do have
Mm-hmm.
it all turns out perfectly
Right.
in the end. It all is not lost. In both situations, all could be lost. In both situations, all was not lost.
Right.
Yeshua had more activity and tragic activity, painful activity, and yet the end of the story is a very happy story that
Yeah.
we're all thankful for.
Yeah. Definitely.
So these scenarios, when we track them in Esther and in the end of Gospel of John, it's amazing how
Mm-hmm.
even the emotional, the highs and the lows and the highs and the lows,
Yeah.
they track each other.
Yeah.
So it's not all tragic, it's not all hilarious. It's a combination of both.
Mm-hmm.
And for both Esther and Yeshua, their emotions would go up and down and up and
Right.
down and up
It's a
and
trying
down. So
experience.
very trying
So
experience.
I
And
know.
even the women at the end that meet Yeshua.
Mm-hmm.
So the women at the end, they come a little while before dawn
Yeah.
because Shabbat is over and they can come and tend and see what the body looks like and
Right.
what they can do. They buy some spices and they come. And lo and behold, he's not there.
He's not there. Yeah.
He's not there. Imagine the feeling of those women. They're sad enough as it is.
Right.
They're devastated. And
Right.
they go,
Which
where's the
explains
body?
the question where she asked him, like, "What have you done with the body? Where did you take him?"
Now someone has stolen the body. I
Right.
mean, to add insult to injury.
Literally. Yeah.
Um, literally. I mean, we know that's not, but imagine how they felt, how horrific their job was. They felt they
Right.
had to go and take care of him because, remember, nobody was with him except for John and his mom.
Right. I can't
And they had
imagine.
to go. And I'm sure John took her away before she could see what was happening
Yeah.
at the end
Yeah.
because he's there for several hours.
Right.
I don't think you would, if you were in charge of somebody's mother at the execution, I think you would take the mom away before she had to see that.
Yeah. I think I would at least try. Yeah.
Come on, let's
Let's
go.
go.
Let's go
Yeah.
back and
Yeah.
see what we
That would
can do.
be. Yeah. I can't imagine how awful of an experience that would be for her. And I know, even speaking about, his execution by the Romans, um, where he was crucified. After I read your article, the first time I read it a few years ago, I was looking and digging a little more, and I was doing some memorization in the book of Esther, which is part of why I read the article. And
Oh,
so
wow.
I wanted to dig a little. And when I was reading, and the translation I was using I think it kept using like that, Haman had like erected a gallows
Uh-huh.
for Mordecai. And I was like digging, I was like, did they really use gallows in the sense? Because I'm thinking like Wild Westerns, with a rope and they're hanging people. And
Not exactly.
And as I was digging into it a little more, it was like, oh no, this was the prototype that the Romans eventually got their hands on and turned into a cross. Um,
Right. It was a tree. I mean, literally,
yeah,
what Haman was using was a tree that was rigged up, and that's what the Romans did. They used a tree that was rigged up to do what they
yeah.
wanted it to
They
do.
just
Yeah,
made it
storon,
worse.
the Greek word, is used both for what Haman had going, and
Mm-hmm.
we understand him to be hung, but not with a rope necessarily. There are many,
Right,
many different ways you can be hung from a tree trunk,
right.
and the same with Yeshua.
Yeah.
Did
And
not
so,
involve a lasso, as far as I know,
yeah, yeah.
but the same kind of execution. This
Right.
hanging from a
Yeah.
tree trunk,
And in a very real sense of the way the Romans copied and bettered, if you will, although I don't think it's a
torture,
betterment. Yeah. You can't really
better
make
ways of
something even
torture,
better.
more hurtful
Um,
ways. Yeah.
yeah, they in a very real sense, like it's it's the tree for Mordecai version 2.0. Um,
Yeah.
and just making that connection for me was really fascinating to see, like, oh, this is like very real connection here. Um, and
Yes.
even the concept that, like, it is the 3 days and 3 nights of fasting that is what secures salvation, right? Esther says to Mordecai, go fast for 3 days and nights. I and my maidens will also fast. And then
Correct.
we see his death on, and then it's 3 days and 3 nights and he's resurrected. And that's that our salvation is secured with the 3 day, 3 night motif there.
You
Um,
see, and that's another coincidence. 3 days and 3 nights. Really, is that a
right.
coincidence that
Really?
you have that time period? There are so many distinct things that match the stories together. For instance,
Yeah.
remember I said about the charcoal
Mm-hmm.
braziers that are around the courtyard for the use of the Roman soldiers. Well, one of the descriptions in that first chapter of Esther is this fine banquet, and
Mm.
here's this beautiful cup that the king has, which has same word in Greek,
Hmm.
a beautiful red stone, which is the same Greek word as charcoal.
Right.
That's a red glowing charcoal. That, like, these specific words are used in both stories. Um, the lithostratus is the floor
Mm-hmm.
on which the group, I'm not going to call them a mob, the group of people that were there in front of Pilate, um, no more than 40 people tops. Um, and there's a lithostratus, that word, in the king's palace in Persia. I mean, these specific words that are used nowhere else in the scriptures except for
Yeah.
Esther and
Yeah.
John. There must be a reason. This is
Right.
not a coincidence. He's using the vocabulary. And it's almost like nowadays we say the phrase, if you know, you know.
Right.
If you know the story of Esther, which most Christians don't, like 95% of Christians have no idea about the story of Esther.
Right.
So when you read the Gospel of John in the end, if you know, that story is all mixed in with
Yeah.
the end of Yeshua's life. And you're just going, why? Why would John use that, like you asked just now? Because it makes it so much richer,
Hmm.
because it adds more details, it adds more emotions, it adds more um, weightiness to the
Mm-hmm.
story. Just like if you watch a movie and it's based on some story from, I don't know, Lithuania, you can watch the story and be entertained. It was a
Right.
great movie. But if you know the story from Lithuania, you can go, oh my God,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
And we've seen that. Like Romeo and Juliet has been made into several different
Mm-hmm.
shows. It's been made into West Side Story.
Right.
It's been made into, there's three or four others that Romeo and Juliet has been made into in more modern times.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to have read Romeo and Juliet to understand West Side Story. But if
Sure.
you've read Romeo and Juliet, it's spooky. It's great. It
Right.
adds a whole layer of understanding to not only the story, but what the outcome of the
And especially, I think if you go into something like that, not knowing that West Side Story is a copy of Romeo and Juliet, there's going to be those moments of like, hey, I know who that character is.
yeah, yeah.
There's that
And it makes
excitement
it
of
richer.
recognizing those
There's more
patterns.
to it. It's more memorable.
Yeah.
See, you'll remember it more clearly because it has a lot of stuff to bring back your memory.
Yeah.
That's the way our memory works is
Repetition.
well, the best way to describe it as far as we know at this point is you have a grid in your
Hmm.
brain, not a physical grid, but a grid
Right.
which has like boxes in it, and you
Hmm.
put vocabulary words that you think go together in a box.
Mm.
And then here's
Hmm.
another one. So you put other vocabulary words that you think go together in that box. And that's why you misspeak sometimes, is that you're
Hmm.
pulling the wrong word out of your box. You're
Yeah.
mistaking it, but it's coming out of that same group, that semantic group that
Gotcha.
you've stored together in all those giant. It used to be file cabinets in your brain, but now it's more like computer files in your
Right.
brain.
Right.
You can tell how old I am.
Uh,
But
yeah.
cabinet
So,
files, actually, the picture is very interesting,
yeah.
where you pull it out and all those go together.
Yeah.
It's in that drawer.
So, so John is intentionally working through in this gospel narrative to um, grab phrases, words, pictures, and even specific scenarios in the way he's telling them and shaping his story and his retelling of them to get his
Mhm.
audience to kind of connect back to Esther.
To connect back and to give it a lot of weight
Wait.
and importance and
Right.
uh, heaviness in a good
Hmm.
way, and it all adds to the memory.
Yeah.
It adds to, oh, I remember what happened to Yeshua because I remember what happened to Esther.
Yeah.
And he's also, if you want to think of it this way,
Hmm.
he's a master storyteller. John is a very good storyteller. And in other words, it's not like a news broadcast, what
Hmm.
he's telling you. It's like, I want to explain to you these kinds of things.
Right.
It's more of an informal, not so much just the facts. It's making them more part of a complete story.
Mm.
If you see sometime as he's going through, let's pretend we don't know the end of Yeshua's story.
Right.
He's going through this time where he gets arrested, and Esther things keep being brought up. Then he's giving you a hint. Remember how Esther turned out?
Right.
Everything turned out okay. So guess what's going to happen in the end of this
Oh,
story?
he's going to be
Everything's going
vindicated.
to turn
He's going to
out
be let loose.
okay. I
Everything's
mean,
going to be fine.
he's yes. Now, West Side Story, both Tony and Maria do not die.
Hmm.
Maria lives, but then we have that a musical nowadays that's called Anne Juliet, which is about Juliet lived in Romeo, and it's a very nice musical. But you see how if you just say that story about Romeo and Juliet, then all these images come into your mind.
Right.
So I think what was true about John at this time, you said Esther, and as he lives through it, he goes, "This is unbelievable. All I can see is Esther."
Hmm.
And now at the end, it's different, but not really.
Right.
The
And
big whole picture,
it
not really
seems like
different.
he's making the intentional usage there to then also make the twist, if you will. The
Yes,
twist in the story is that, well, Esther lived, Mordecai lived,
yeah. And
Yeshua didn't.
Haman
Right.
and
The
Haman got
villain
what
was the
they
one who was,
deserved.
yeah, the villain was the one who died in Esther, but
Uh-huh.
the hero is the one who dies here. But the twist is that not only does he die, but his death is what actually secures salvation for the people.
So what appears to be bad turned out to be
Right.
wonderful.
Right. And what appeared to be bad, Esther being taken to the king's palace, because nobody wants that. That's not a position of life and flourishing and freedom. You're basically stuck there. It wasn't a beauty pageant. It was not a good experience. That's all bad. But those bad things resulted in the salvation of their people. And so John is then saying, if I understand kind of the picture, and you can correct me if I'm wrong or elaborate on it, John is basically saying, like, you see the faithfulness that God has given to us in the past in Esther. Look at how he worked through these things, his covenant love, his faithfulness, his sovereign guiding and working of all things together for good, as Paul says later. We see that again here. That the story of Yeshua is the same thing. It's God's love, his faithfulness, his covenantal love, working through all of these things to care for and secure salvation for his people, and ultimately not just limited to his people in Israel, but ultimately to the entire world.
Whosoever will, I think the phrase is.
Yeah. Man, so I think that's really amazing to see how that all works together, and John does that. How would you suggest or recommend to our audience, whatever level of Bible familiarity that they may or may not have, how would you recommend that this kind of framework of understanding that the authors will do this and they'll reflect back on things? How would you recommend that change or amplify or modify the way the reader approaches the text?
Oh, you mean where could I go if I wanted to read other things?
Sure. Or even just
pardon me, I'm going to look at the paper to remind myself.
Yeah, even just like
So
how would we, should this change the way we read the text, rather than just like, okay, I'm not just reading it as a story, but I need to be reading it with the mindset of looking to, okay, where else has God done this before?
Well, you could do that. You can get the book about scripture coding by Wolfgang Roth. His last name is Roth, Roth. He was a professor at Garrett Evangelical Seminary.
Okay.
I'm not sure if he's still with us or if he's gone to his reward. I would think is a little bit older than I am. And here's what he did. And I'm just going to drop this off and leave it. My husband could discuss his. The Gospel of Mark is the replication of the miracles of Elijah and Elisha.
Yes.
And that's what informs that. And so that's what he worked with. And that's his example that he gave, is the way he figured out that. And so I just applied that process to Esther and John when I realized there was more there than I could possibly explain. I'm trying to find the actual name of his book. Okay, so this is Wolfgang Roth. I think he's Roth because he's German. Right. 1988. This comes from Hebrew Gospel. That's something you can remember. Hebrew Gospel, Cracking the Code of Mark is that first book of his. An earlier book where he goes through the Gospel of John is Wolfgang Roth in 1987, which was a reprint out of the journal Biblical Research. I would think to get the concept of what is the literary technique that's being used here, and then how does it inform the text? Because obviously, if we see this as that these scenes in the book of Esther are related to the scenes that Yeshua is going through, obviously, then we have to say in some way the Esther is influencing the story that John is creating here about the incidents that he saw. That's something. And so how do we get something out of this? How can we not just say, isn't that interesting? What an interesting coincidence.
Right.
But there must be ways, if we sat down and have, with 5 people at a table and had a confab about it, come up with how Esther informs what John was writing, because obviously it did. Now, why does that help? And what can we get out of it? And I think that is a further step that would, ideally need to be done. It's just like when you take Mark and go, okay, or if I'm seeing that these are the miracles of Elijah and Elisha being replicated and making the format that he's presenting Yeshua's miracles and his ministry in the world. So how does that mean something, and how do I process that? Because obviously Mark is thinking about those stories,
Yeah.
and bringing them into the story of Yeshua and comparing them without being overt. It's you don't have to know the miracles that Elijah and Elisha did in order to understand Mark. But boy, it really helps once you know it. It really helps you have a deeper feeling, a deeper understanding of where they were coming from and what they were trying to teach the generations that were going to read it.
And that's
Is that sort of helpful?
I
Oh,
think so.
The other article, or the other book that also inspired me was by a woman named Golding, Guilding, Eileen, Aileen. She wrote a book, which is what I actually was the very first book that I read about anything about that, from 1960. And it was called The Fourth Gospel and Jewish Worship. The Fourth Gospel and Jewish Worship. It's published by Oxford. And in that, so this is in 1960, and this is a woman writing about the Gospel of John. And her take on John was that when the early believers got together, they would get together on Saturday evening. They would go to services at their local group or their local synagogue, and then Saturday evening they would meet together and worship and have their worship and talk about Yeshua. So in those evening worships on Saturday night, which technically on a Jewish calendar is the first day of the week.
Right.
After the sun goes down on Shabbat, you have now started the first day of the week. So when it says we met on the first day of the week, they may mean Sunday morning, but most likely they're meeting after supper on Saturday night, because they're working. They can't meet on Sunday morning. They work. It's their work day.
Yeah, because
So
the only
meeting.
place that actually says that like the community of believers met on Sunday, it uses the phrase miaton sabbaton, which is in Acts, and it explicitly states that it was evening because there's candles everywhere. It's been a long day. Paul's getting ready to.
And when Eutychus falls out of the building, it's not because they've been preaching for 12 hours. It's because it got late in the evening on Saturday.
Right.
And he fell asleep.
And miaton sabbaton means like the first of the Sabbaths, or it's like it's a weekly counting marker.
Yeah. So she said, so Gilding maintains that they would follow the Jewish portion of the week. In other words, in synagogues, every week, all synagogues read the same portion of the Older Testament, and not the whole thing, but the first 5 books. And so she's saying that their worship is repeating those parts of the Torah, the discrete readings for each Sabbath, and reflecting it. So she thinks that John intended this story to be read on a weekly basis, just like they read the Torah passage for the week on a weekly basis, which is very interesting. And the professor I was doing this course under said, I remember, he remembered 1960, older than I was. I wasn't even in middle school, but he said that book was not very well received. Well, it's 1960. It's a different age. Yeah. It's a different everything. But when I read it back a while ago, so I'd have to reread it. It's definitely worth reading and seeing how she's trying to fit the gospel into the Jewish worship right after Yeshua's death and resurrection. Yeah, it's very interesting.
So the argument then basically is that, if I understand correctly, it's it's not replacing, but creating like an additional Haftarah reading.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And to the audience that may not know what that means, weekly you read from the Torah portion, which is a section from the Torah every week. In addition
Mhm,
to that, you read a reading from the prophets that
mhm,
corresponds either in theme or specific language to that.
mhm.
And so then
Or a
John would be,
phrase.
or
There's a
phrase,
phrase that's
yeah.
included. Yeah. Mhm.
And then John would
And
be in
this,
addition to that, where it's carrying
yeah,
similar themes or phrases.
yeah, the ancient rabbis were the ones that put the Torah portion
Right.
with a portion from outside the Torah that matches with it, that goes together
Yeah.
with it. But Messianic synagogues nowadays, we do the same thing. We do the Torah passage, then you do the half Torah passage, and then you do from the Newer Testament. We
Right.
have a passage every week we do that once again has the same themes or as reminders
Hmm.
of something that went on
Yeah.
in the Torah portion. So yeah. And, over half of the Christian world reads the same sections of scripture every week. No, so no matter what country you're going in, if you're going into, especially the ones that we consider the high worship, um,
Right. The high church.
but
Yeah.
Methodists use it too. There's a yearly prayer book, and the next
Right.
week this is going to be the reading. And it sort of is nice if you're traveling a lot and you go into a church, you know what they're going to basically be speaking on. It's
Yeah.
going to be what all
There
these
will be
other
a different
churches.
take or a different, application, but you know what the passage is.
Yes, you know what the passage is going to
Right.
be, and it's in a certain way. It's nice to be surprised by what the pastor speaks on Sunday morning. It's nice, but it's
Right.
also nice to go. Oh, I expect he's going to say something about this today
Right.
because this is around the time when we learn about this.
Yeah.
Um, so we like to be free in the spirit, but sometimes we like to have some kind of format that we can all
Right.
depend on, and there is a sense of comfort in that. And
Yeah.
also, it sort of guarantees that you're not just concentrating on one book of the Bible.
Hmm.
During the year, you're spreading it out and you're looking at all sorts of
Yeah. My
areas in the
very
Bible.
Baptist upbringing was liturgy is bad, repetition is bad. You don't want to do that. And
No, it's that straight line, the engineer's straight line
right.
toward the future. Yeah,
Today I'm
yeah, yeah.
like, no, I wish I had a lot more liturgy in my life. I like those patterns, those repetitions,
Or
those,
or
yeah,
predictability
the
that if we
predictability.
don't, because even different churches, we don't have liturgy, but they're doing a responsive
Right.
reading and they're doing the Lord's Prayer, and some of them do the Apostles' Creed. Well, what do you think you're doing when you're
Right.
saying those things? Come
Yeah.
on, but oh no, the Spirit guides us.
Yeah, he
Okay,
does
whatever you think, but it's not
through
correct.
normative means like
You're
that.
not
Yeah.
right. You got to come on, people. We have to admit
Yeah.
there is a way we do things, and there's a way we expect to do things when we go to
Right.
a worship service. It's
Right.
fine. Let's
So,
admit it. It's fine.
yeah, it is. It is. It's okay to have a
It's
normative
okay.
set pattern and process. That's okay.
Well, but memorize prayers, you can't get anything out of them. Really?
Yeah, that's okay too.
Really? Some
Yeah.
days you do, and some days you do.
Yep. Yep.
That's true about all worship. Some days it's good, and some days it's.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Well, I really appreciate your time, Patrice. And thank you for sharing about Esther and John and the connections there. If people want to see or hear more from you, they can always head to our Menorah Ministries website. Do you write or
And
speak regularly anywhere else that people can kind of find you or?
I do. I teach a course this semester. I'm teaching former prophets, which is what you might call early history. So it's
Mhm.
Joshua, Judges, First, Second Samuel, First, Second
Right.
Kings. Every semester I teach something. So this semester it's former prophets. Last semester I taught Torah, the first 5 books of Moses. I also teach courses in major prophets, the writing prophets,
Yeah.
and then I also then the 12 uh, smaller prophets, sometimes called the minor, but they're not minor; they're just small. So I have a regular schedule of semesters where I'm teaching at the seminary.
Gotcha.
So you can listen to those. What I was going to say is if they wanted to order a copy of the Esther John paper,
Hmm.
which is about 25 pages, You can order that through the Menorah Ministries
Yes.
website, I believe. I don't know how much it costs right off the top of my
I
head.
should know
But you're
because
more
I'm
than
in
welcome
charge
to
of
order
that
that.
part of the website, but I don't know off the top of my head.
Right. And so go look at the area where you can get the literature.
I'll put a
because
link to the website just in general in our description, but I'll also put a link specifically to the paper if people are curious to read more about it.
yes, the Menorah Ministries would be helpful. And you can also go to orkalash.com, which is our, .org, which is our congregation website, and it has sermons. So every now and then I do a sermon for our
It's
congregation.
usually it's John, but I've heard you speak once or twice. Thank you all so much for joining me for today's episode. If you like the video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you want to hear or read more from Patrice, or if you want to support the work we do at Menorah Ministries, you can check out the links in the description.